My name is Dr. Jim Oliver. I'm the provost here at the Seminole campus of St. Petersburg College. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to another in this series on the future of energy in Florida, sponsored by our Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. Thank you for coming to learn more about this vital element of our modern life, energy. And I'd also like to offer thanks to our corporate co-sponsors for this series, the Tampa Bay Times, Nature's Food Patch, Covanta Energy, and Clearwater Gas System. These great local organizations recognize the importance of sound public policy, and let's recognize them now for their support, if you join me. We look forward to another stimulating conversation about the future of energy from our fine panel, whom we'll introduce in just a few moments. But now, to get the program underway, is our Executive Director of the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, Mr. David Clement. David.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver, and thank all of you, small but dedicated group of people interested in this important issue. We thank you for coming, and I want to add my thanks to our co-sponsors for helping make this possible. This is, as Dr. Oliver said, another in the series that we're trying to do to put a spotlight on the vital issues of the day for our community. And what is more vital than energy? Not many things. As I said in the first of the sessions that we did on this subject back in January, when we looked at nuclear energy, energy is one of the most important things that we have in our modern world. It's right up there with shelter and food as an important part of our just our modern life. Much concern about the future of energy has been focused on two sources mostly: fossil fuel, that is oil or gas, and nuclear. And there's too little attention paid, in my opinion, to the other source of energy generation, renewables, such as solar, wind, or hydro. These sources don't create environmental problems. They're sustainable, and they are becoming more affordable by the day, I'm told. And even less attention is given to the ultimate in clean energy policy, efficiency, the act of consciously using less energy so it doesn't even have to be generated in the first place. Tonight, we are paying attention to this vital subject, and with this outstanding panel, we hope that they will shed light on it that will help us understand it all better. Now, here to introduce the panelists and get the program underway is Susan Glickman as the moderator. She is the director of the Florida Business Network for a Clean Energy Economy. Susan.
Good evening. Thank you for everyone for coming out, and I also want to add my thanks to our co-sponsors, the Tampa Bay Times, who has been very generous and putting ads in the paper for our events, as well as Nature's Food Patch and Covanta Energy and Clearwater Gas Systems as well. So I'm Susan Glickman. I'm the director of the Florida Business Network for Clean Energy Economy, and thanks to all of you guys for coming, Steve, and Chef, and Joe, and Chuck as well. It seemed to me this afternoon, we've done a number of events around energy, one in January, but we also did a series of events, many of you all may have been out around the oil spill. And normally, we fill up this audience pretty quickly here, so when David Clement said to me today, you know, we haven't had as many RSVPs, I said, why do you think that's so? And David said, I think it's because it's not sexy. So I decided tonight that I'm going to present a challenge to the audience that we have to make energy sexy. Chef and Steve. So it's a big challenge, but why is that? When you have an issue that's as important as this one is, that deals with public health, it deals with economic development, it deals with the greenhouse gas emissions and the buildup of greenhouse gas emissions, which is one of the environmental crises of our time. So why, when these important issues are at stake, aren't more people involved? And we need to get more people involved. So I think that's a bit of our challenge and is overcoming apathy. I did want to acknowledge two people that are here with us this evening. One is my state representative, Jim Frisch, and we appreciate your taking time to be here, and Bill Smith, who's on the Indian Shore City Council. And did I miss any electeds here? Okay, I really appreciate you all coming. They're on the front lines of making things happen. So I'll mention just for a minute a little bit about the state of play, and then we're going to turn to our panelists, and each one of the panelists is going to present from their perspective, and then we're going to have dialogue among the panelists, and then ultimately open it up to questions and answers. So we have plenty of time to delve in pretty deeply this evening. You've got a lot of changing dynamics, which I think are most interesting around energy. For those of you that were at the panel on nuclear energy, we talked a lot about the costs. And if it was 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been in a position to talk about the crossover in costs between solar PV on a rooftop is really about at par with what a new nuclear power plant costs. But that's not a conversation that we could have had 2 years ago. So there are a lot of changing dynamics with the cost for fossil fuels going up and the cost for new renewables coming down, along with all these new innovations that are making clean energy alternatives, energy efficiency, conservation, and new renewables more doable. We have new innovations, we have battery storage, there's all kinds of changes that are really happening here. So I'm going to introduce the panelists whose job this evening is to make this topic sexy. So now I'm looking forward to hearing it. We're going to start with my colleague, Stephen Smith, who's here from Knoxville, Tennessee. Stephen has a doctorate in veterinary medicine, which I always thought was really interesting. And he, like Joe Treschler over here, walks the walk and talks the talk. Steve and his family are doing their best to live in a net zero energy home. And they have a 7.1 kilowatt rooftop solar PV system and a solar thermal system as well. So you're going to hear from Steve, who's been working on energy issues for 30 years almost. Something like that. And then we're going to hear from Chef Wright, who is right here to my left. Chef is an attorney in Tallahassee. He has also more than 30 years experience. He's often found in the Florida Public Service Commission working for his clients, which are many, like the Florida Retail Federation and renewable energy producers and waste to energy facilities. Chef and I worked together when they were helping to site a biomass plant in Gainesville, Florida, which is just breaking ground. So you're going to learn a lot from Chef this evening. And then to Chef's left is Joe Treschler, who's Vice President for Business Management and Development for Covanta Energy. And you've been with Covanta Energy about 25 years, so in every aspect of 27. Okay. So that's a lot of years. So anyway, we're going to hear about the role that waste to energy plays. And then Joe's also keenly aware of the broader policy issues that are really stopping us from moving in a big way into clean energy. And then last but not least is Chuck Warrington with the Clearwater Gas Systems. They're doing some really interesting things using natural gas vehicles, and we're going to hear about that, which is a much more efficient way of moving transportation, moving people around. So Steve, we're going to start out with you first. You're going to give us sort of a little broader overview of energy and how you see it.
Great, thank you, Susan. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you, and thanks for folks coming out, because I know everybody's busy, and I don't know how sexy I'll make this, but I'll do the best I can. Let me give a little background on myself. As Susan said, my name is Stephen Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. And I'll talk a little bit about the group here in a second, but as Susan said, I'm a veterinarian by training. I gave up my veterinary practice 10, 15 years ago, actually, to focus on this full time. I've been doing environmental policy work even before I went into vet school, and came out of vet school and got more and more involved in the energy arena through the organization. I'm also father of 3 boys, and I have 2 grandchildren, and that is actually one of the primary motivations for why I do the work that I do, because I see in a very real sense the choices we're making today are diminishing the world for our children and our grandchildren. And the energy choices in particular, because they are having a profound impact on the world that we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. And Florida is really at the center of that, because while I live in Knoxville, Tennessee right now, I lived a significant part of my life, I lived in Pensacola, Florida. It's still maintain a place on Perdido Key in the area there. And I firsthand walked those beaches, I guess it was a year or so ago, when you had the BP spill with the oil washing up there in Gulf Shores and other things. And I experienced that very, very much firsthand. And in a very real sense, we've seen a lot of problems developing from our current energy choices, and BP was certainly one of them. Our organization, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, you can learn more about it at cleanenergy.org. Very easy to remember, just cleanenergy.org. We work in 5 areas. We work on climate policy, and as Susan said, I firmly believe that we are transforming and disrupting and destabilizing our climate. It's an overwhelmingly large system to try to understand and comprehend, for humans to understand. But if you look at the science is overwhelming that we are having a very discernible impact on our climate. I had daffodils in my front yard in Knoxville in January this year. We basically didn't have a winter at all. And I know there's variations, but you see consistent trends up in where we're going with the way we're impacting the climate, and the average temperatures going up across the globe. We work on climate policy. We work on energy efficiency. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. We've done a lot of work here in Florida. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy works in 5 southern states: Florida, North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. And we've done a fair amount of work here in Florida over the years, and have developed somewhat of an understanding of some of the issues that are very much alive and well here in Florida. And advocating for energy efficiency is a key part of our work. Another area that the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy works on is clean energy, which is talking about renewable energy. Again, we'll talk about that more tonight. We also work on clean fuels. Clean fuels are what we look at: renewable fuels such as biodiesel, cellulosic ethanol. We also are strong believers in electric vehicles. We've actually done, and I drive an electric Nissan Leaf, and I'm utterly convinced that is the car of the future, and it is one of the most remarkable vehicles that I've ever driven. And so clean fuels, we think electricity can be a clean fuel. And then we work to oppose certain technologies which we classify as high-risk energy choices. And those are coal plants, nuclear power plants, and offshore drilling. And we also look at the tar sands coming out of Canada as sort of an extension of the drilling and the raping of the land in a very literal sense. So those are the 5 areas that we work on. I'm eager to get into the conversation tonight, so I'm not going to take a lot of time going over all the problems, because I think we'll bring them out over the course of the conversation. But what I would want to emphasize is that we are at a critical juncture. We have built a system in the United States that actually works quite well, or has historically worked quite well. We have one of the most reliable utility grids in the world. If you've traveled to other countries, you may have experienced firsthand some of the problems that a lot of the developing world and even some of the developed world have with their electric grids. We have a very reliable grid writ large. We've accomplished many of the objectives that when we set up these state-sponsored monopolies and other ways to bring electrification to the citizens of the United States, we've done a pretty good job. But what we're beginning to see are some fundamental problems and cracks in that system. The system is contributing significantly to global climate change because a significant amount of the power that we use comes from fossil fuels. Still over 50% of the electricity in the United States is coming from burning coal. We've seen some turn down of that, but we're still experiencing very high levels of utilization of coal. We have built the 20% of our power comes from these nuclear power plants that we've built, and we've seen issues with nuclear power over the years, most recently in Japan with the Fukushima event that we've now just celebrated the first anniversary from. Right here, just up the road, those of you who have been paying attention have probably heard the cracks, heard about the cracks at the Progress Crystal River plant. We've renamed that plant the Humpty Dumpty plant because we really honestly do not believe that they're ever going to be able to put that plant back together again. But it should be quite concerning to you to know that the safety containment vessel has now been cracked 3 times by the company that runs the facility, and they did not expect any of those cracks ever to happen. And that plant, we believe, will likely not be ever started back up again. And we've seen that we haven't solved the nuclear waste issue. So these really sort of major sources of how we get our power, we're beginning to see that they're not sustainable. They're fundamentally flawed for a lot of reasons. I could go into great detail about that. And we need to make a change. The good news is that we have an opportunity. As Susan mentioned, I have direct experience. We've advocated for a long time that renewable energy works. And I'm here to tell you it works. I have it on my house. I know it works. Between my solar system and my geothermal system, we virtually use, on a net basis, no net electricity. Now, since I've started plugging my electric car in, we've upped that a little bit, but still, as a general rule, I looked at my meter the other day, and I've used in 3 years, after 3 years of use, I think I've used 2,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, and that's at the end of the winter. I'll run my meter backwards all summer, and it'll get back down to 0. But even at the high point, right at the end of the winter, I've used as much as most people use in maybe 2 months on the average use. And what I'm telling you is that solar power works. It's here. It's becoming increasingly affordable, and we need to figure out ways to unleash the innovation for that. Energy efficiency works. It's here. Technology is changing all the day. We've gone from the incandescent bulb, which was really a better heater than it was a light source, because when you touched it, it would burn your fingers, to the compact fluorescent, which is, again, a cooler. So you go from a 100-watt bulb to a 15-watt bulb, and now we're going down to LEDs, which are, maybe 2 or 3 watts. So this trend line, just with lighting, is what we're seeing in other things. I remember when the compressor on my air conditioner used to come on, my lights used to dim in my house. That doesn't happen anymore. The refrigerators are so much more efficient. Things like geothermal heat pumps and other things are phenomenal technology that can dramatically reduce your consumption. I saw close to a 70% reduction in my overall energy use by using geothermal. These technologies are there, they work. What we need to do now is come up with the policy mechanisms that allow them to be utilized on a large scale. I believe that we can do that. I believe that we can find ways to do that. I think it is a moral imperative, because leaving a world where we've disrupted the climate, we've put the Everglades and other places underwater, we've lost our beaches, we've lost our coral reefs, leaves a diminished world for our children. Leaving an intergenerational debt of nuclear waste is unethical. I think we should not do that. Plus, you guys shouldn't be paying for power plants that you will probably never live to see, because the Levy plant and the Turkey Point plant down in are probably not going to be built in your lifetime. I've got gray hair. I will probably not see those plants ever be built, but yet the power companies are taking money out of your pocket today for that, and yet we should be outraged. We should be outraged that the Florida legislature let that bill get through, and they're not reversing it, because we know for a fact now, I believe those plants will never be built, and yet they're still taking your money. And that money could be better spent on some of the things that we all want to see happen that could unleash the potential and the innovation. Florida is the largest state in the United States that does not have a coherent energy policy. It is the largest market for renewable energy that has not been tapped. And so, there's my time. And so I believe that we have an opportunity here to make the changes. And so I'm hoping through the dialogue, through the discussion tonight, that we'll get into that. And I look forward to answering your question, engaging with the other panelists. Thank you very much.
So Steve was a very well-behaved panelist and kept to his time. So next, Chef, you're up.
Thank you. Thanks and good evening. And I'm going to thank Steve for setting his timer, because I've now set my timer for 10 minutes, and it'll go off, and we'll be in good shape. Good evening. My name is Chef Wright. I'm a native Floridian. I was born in Miami 62 years ago. I've lived all but 9 years of my life here. In the last 31 years of my life, gosh, that's half my life. Wow. Slightly more than half my life, I've lived in Tallahassee working on energy issues. I was a first career economist. I taught college for a couple of years and got into legislative research, but moved back to Florida in December of 1980 to take a job in the energy office of Governor Bob Graham, where I did research for about a year and a half. After that, I moved over to the Public Service Commission staff, where I worked for about 7 years, first in research and then in the electric and gas division, where my particular specialty was electric rates, and particularly electric rates that related to independent power producers or cogenerators or qualifying facilities, if you're familiar with that term. I got a break after that, went to law school, and have continued working in the energy area continuously through law school as a consultant and as a quirky practitioner of law, and then I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years now, an official member of the Florida Bar. My clients, as Susan mentioned, include consumers, the Florida Retail Federation. I represent a number of municipalities who have various issues with undergrounding, overhead power lines to underground, franchise issues, energy efficiency and conservation, and so on. I also represent a number of renewable energy producers, including biomass producers, solar energy producers, and waste energy producers. So that's who I am, and I'll tell you, I'm a native Floridian. I love this state. I write songs about it, and I'm not making that up. I care passionately about this. I also, Susan says, make this sexy. Here's what I think about that. The thing with sexy is that when you talk about sexy, there's like a certain immediacy to it. Like, you know, the beautiful woman, my wife down there, that you see in the moment. You know, that's sexy. The oil spill was sexy, in a terrible way. In an equally or worse terrible way, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in Japan a year ago was sexy because it was immediate and it was calamitous. What we're talking about here is a long-term solution to a long-standing problem. And it's hard to make a decision that's going to bear fruit 5 years, 10 years, 40 years in the lives, as Steve said, in the lives of our grandchildren. It's hard to make that sexy. So I'm going to say, I look at it as being meaningful. Maybe not sexy tonight, but meaningful tomorrow morning. Will you still love me tomorrow? Meaningful a year from now. Meaningful when my grandchildren are born. That's what I look at. I'll tell you a few things, and we'll wander around and see what happens. I love facts, so I'm going to give you all some facts. Not a lot. You don't have to take notes. But here's where I come from this as a native Floridian and somebody who's been working on this now for literally half his life. Our wonderful state is extremely vulnerable to energy cost volatility and physical interruptions. We import somewhere between 97 and 99% of all of our electric generating fuels in this state. And I brought a report with me. This is the Florida Reliability Coordinating Council, which is the entity that operates the Florida transmission system. And this is their summary report of all the utilities. Okay, you know, for a cookie, what was Florida's renewable energy percentage production in 2010? 1.16. Close. What's it projected to grow to in 2020? 1.14. You got it. See me afterwards. I'll give you a cookie. For all practical purposes, I think there is a new ethanol plant online that is contributing to Florida's transportation fuel supply. But for all practical purposes, folks, we import 100% of our transportation fuels. Ballpark, we spend something like 15, 16, maybe $17 billion a year in this state just on electric generating fuels. Virtually every penny of that whoosh, goes out of the state. That's the fuel part. That's not the plant part. The plant part does stay here to some degree. But it goes out of the state. We use the unit for natural gas is 1 million BTU. We use and that's what people talk about in terms of consumption for electric generation and pricing. So we say the current price for natural gas is $4 a million BTU. That's about right. What happens? We use 1 billion million BTU a year for generation in Florida, just under. If the price goes up $1, that's $1 billion gone out of the state. If the price goes up $5, and that happens, folks, with natural gas, the price does this. It's wacky. If the price goes up $5, that's $5 billion out of our state. That's $5 billion that's no longer in Floridians' pockets because they had to spend it to pay their power bills. It's gone to wherever, Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Mexico, possibly Yemen or Algeria if it's LNG imported from one of those countries, et cetera. That money that would have been spent in Florida is gone. And the folks who could have spent it can't spend it either. There are serious economic repercussions of this. We are talking about real impacts on, sorry, I didn't realize that was a microphone. Yeah. Huh, cute. We're talking about real impacts on Floridians' jobs. Now, what are we going to do? I mean, I have some thoughts. In the broadest terms, we need to do everything we can possibly do starting yesterday or a long time before yesterday. And you can talk about should we have really gotten our stuff together in 1973 when we experienced the Arab oil embargo. I was driving then. I was waiting in lines. Probably, should we have done something about it in the second big oil price run up in the late 70s when everything went to hell in Iran? Probably. Should we have done something about it more recently? Absolutely. We didn't. That's sunk cost. That's history. We need to do everything we can do starting today. And that means energy efficiency where it's sensible, conventional generation, whether it's gas-fired or, and I differ with Steve, and I'll explain why in a minute, on nuclear, or nuclear, if that makes sense. I have real issues with the cost of nuclear, but I'll talk about that in a second. Renewables, where that makes sense. What we really need is real, what Susan and I would call integrated resource planning, where all resources, supply side, whether it's nuclear, coal, gas, coal has to be clean. Good luck with that, but hypothetically. Nuclear, gas, renewables on the supply side, and demand side, energy conservation, more efficient envelopes, building envelopes, that is, solar water heating, geothermal space conditioning, heating and cooling, geothermal heat pumps, and so on. Everything needs to compete rationally. The low-cost supply or avoidance option should win. I am sorry, folks, this does not happen today. For example, in the nuclear cost recovery statute, the one that Steve remarked on that allows Progress to recover costs for the Levy project, there is a specific exclusion that the utility does not have to consider offers from cogenerators or renewable power producers to offset the need for that. Now, come on, when it comes down to it, if these plants get built, and I will say I agree with Steve, I believe they will not get built. I don't believe that the Levy plant will be built, certainly not as proposed. I do not believe that FPL's Turkey Point plants will be built as proposed. They don't have a handle on the costs. They started out, they were going to cost $7 billion, $10 billion, something in that range. 14, 17, 18, 22, 22.4, I think, is Progress's last number. I do work on this stuff. We don't believe that number. We think if they were really going to build it, it would be $25 to $30 billion. At that price, the real cost of putting the power onto the grid is probably in the vicinity of 22 to 28 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, it is just nonsense to spend that kind of money when my solar clients will sign a 30-year contract to sell anybody solar power for 19 cents or less a kilowatt hour all day long. I mean, all you want. My biomass clients will sign a 30-year contract. Come on, go away. To sell you power for 16, 15, 14 and a half, maybe 14, long term. Energy efficiency is really cheap. I mean, a solar water heater without subsidies for a typical house probably equates out to something in the range of 10 or 11 cents a kilowatt hour if you amortize it in your mortgage over 20 years. You need to have a rational policy. You need to have market forces work. I will tell you, I'm going to cheat one more minute, why I disagree with Steve on nuclear, and this is strictly a pro-environmental view on nuclear. Well, it's also an energy independence view. We have a ton of uranium in Florida, by the way, but there's abundant uranium. We wouldn't be dependent on worldwide disruptions. The proposition was articulated best by James Lovelock, who is the author of the book Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, the Gaia Hypothesis. And his position is very simple, and I accept it and agree with it. We have got to do something. And renewables are great, and we can probably get there in 20 or 30 years, but we need to do something sooner than that. Nuclear can work, not at $25 billion. Let's look at small modular reactors. And regarding the waste, it's a difficult choice. You know, are you going to deal with the air pollution from conventional generation, or are you going to deal with localized waste storage? For right now, I'm willing to take waste storage. Thanks.
Okay. All right, next we're going to hear from Joe Treasure. We wanted to give you a little disagreement, and the mud wrestling will begin a little later, but Joe first.
Frankly, I don't really have a, how do I get this up on the main screen? Or do you put it?
Paul has.
Paul?
There you go.
Okay, now I can just click. The good news is I don't have any arguments with any of what the first two guys said at all, because they really gave you some good perspective. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about something that I guess either we don't do a good job of, or the Tampa Bay Times doesn't do a good job of, anything, is to remind you that there are viable renewable solutions out there, and Florida's been a leader in it, but it's gone nowhere because of the way the Public Service Commission looks at new facilities that aren't nuclear or aren't natural gas. And we'll get into this a little bit here. My background is as a chemical engineer. Let's see, how does this thing move? There we go. We're going to talk a little bit, just to give you a little background on Covanta, what energy from waste is, a perspective worldwide of how it's used, the status in the U.S., Florida, the environmental advantages and economics. And I'm going to try to do this quickly and keep it sexy, but Covanta is the largest operator of energy from waste facilities in the world. We operate 44 facilities, 41 in this country. We do what our communities want us to do to maintain and manage the portion of the municipal solid waste stream that is not going to recycling, that is going into the ground as landfill. We still landfill over 16 million tons of waste a year in this state. That's 16 million barrels of oil that we put in the ground after recycling, okay? In Florida, we employ 400 people operating 5 of the state's 11 energy from waste facility, enough electricity, base-loaded, renewable power for about 160,000 homes. And that's about the 1%, you talked about 1.4, what's out there is renewable, we're about the 1%. 540 megawatts on the grid, continuously delivered to the utilities of the state. And over this period of time, we've produced over 11.5 million megawatt hours of electricity from what was normally going to landfill. We've also safely disposed of over 45 million tons of waste. That's 45 million barrels of oil. Also 45 million tons of greenhouse gases that are being offset by properly using the energy value in one of Florida's only indigenous fuels. A point that was made here. That's something we already generate, harvest, and collect. We just don't use it correctly in the state. And we've also recovered the ferrous materials and non-ferrous materials for most of these materials. We also are very attuned to safety in the environment, meeting the standards, bettering the standards, and also providing safe work employment states for our people. What are we really doing here? We're recovering the heat that remains in the non-recycled portion of the waste stream. Nearly 8% of the U.S.'s renewable energy comes from energy from waste facilities, like our in Pinellas County, one of the oldest. We don't operate Pinellas, but we operate Hillsborough counties, and Pasco counties, and Lake counties, and Lee counties, and Dade counties as facilities that generate electricity from waste. A barrel of oil isn't needed for every ton of waste we process rather than having it go into the ground. That's 30 million barrels a year here in the United States right now that don't have to be imported, and revenue not leaving the state. It's a power plant, but it's a power plant with very sophisticated air pollution control that meets the Clean Air Act standards, handles it properly, and is continuously monitored to higher standards than any of the other fossil fuel systems in the United States. And when you look at it on a world perspective, Europe is way ahead of us. They have more energy from waste facilities than anyone. They also have less landfills and are moving away from landfills as a way to handle their waste streams. What happens is energy from waste comes up, recycling comes up, and landfilling goes down, as you can see on this chart here. But I'm going to back up a second. This is our problem. The whole United States is asleep on this because we're not being lulled now into believing that natural gas is here for 100 years. And it's not a problem, but it is a problem. You never want to be totally fuel dependent on any one fuel source because many of those LNG stations, you know, we built these in the ports that we were going to import LNG, they're being reversed so we can export our natural gas to the rest of the world. So we're at the bottom of what natural gas costs now. And yet you look at Progress Energy and you look at FP&L, FP&L is almost 70% committed now to natural gas for future generation. So where will we be 10 years from now if we don't have fuel diversity? Florida is a leader in energy from waste. 11 facilities out of the 87 in the United States are here in Florida, and that's because the legislature in the late 70s said we need to stop putting our garbage in our water table. Okay, that was typical practice here. Most people know the Toy Town landfill. It's only now stopped off-gassing at the rates it had been. Those are greenhouse gases 20 times more volatile or more troublesome than carbon dioxide, and we're worried about carbon dioxide. Okay? The EPA looks at energy from waste as a success story. 2,800 megawatts nationally of some of the cleanest energy being generated to the highest standards. And the Clean Air Act of 1999 set the bar high, so the things that were of concern in old-style incinerators are no longer an issue. We're about as clean as a net combined cycle natural gas facility. The state of Florida Public Service Commission a couple years ago did a study and said, what's the low-hanging fruit? And they picked right out energy from waste. Anywhere from 1,300 to 2,200 megawatts could be generated from just what's going into the ground. But you don't see any projects being built. Reason is the avoided cost calculation. An exit poll last year on Florida Tax Watch asked people, how do they view energy from waste? And how do they view it against other renewable sources? Well, of course, they rank solar highest. Absolutely. Then natural gas, wind, and then waste energy. And you notice where the rest of the fossil fuels and even nuclear were, in the minds of Floridians. It also spurs new jobs, creates permanent jobs that can't be exported, and also provides stable electricity that isn't subject to fuel spikes. Your garbage doesn't change in its cost of disposal like natural gas or gasoline because somebody in Iran gets mad. Okay? The impact of one new 1,500 ton a day waste energy facility, that's 500,000 tons of garbage and about 50 megawatts of net generation, is about $400 million, but also has an economic impact on the community during construction of about $650 million. And an annual impact in the community about $22 million of generated jobs, energy, approximately 115 permanent jobs from just to run the facility. You don't get that with a landfill handling 500,000 tons of waste, and you don't get it with a natural gas facility. Increasing, so if you looked at the United States as a whole, we could be doing a lot more. Approximately 2% of our electricity nationally could come from energy from waste if we just saw the kind of growth that we did in the 80s when Florida did build waste energy facilities. 11 facilities were built between 1980 and 1992. But why is the problem? I mentioned this before. Avoided cost says the utility can take a look at what is the absolute cheapest way they can generate the next kilowatt of electricity, and that's what they'll pay an independent developer of a project. Right now, that's about 2.5 cents. And I think you heard Chef give you the numbers for where you would have to be for a proper biomass plant. I'm telling you, waste energy is 8 to 10 cents to do it. Solar's 19 cents. I agree with him. That's why these projects aren't moving forward, because the utility has an easy way to block it, and they don't want an independent power outfit doing it, because buying power for them is not return on investment to its stockholders. They want to put bricks and mortar in the ground. Bricks and mortar in the ground is return on investment to their investors. So you need a renewable portfolio standard that says a certain percentage of your electricity needs to come from renewables. You need to diversify your portfolio so you can do this, and you have to pay people so they can make a profit to build a new facility. And then you need to look outside the box. Renewables, great, and Steve and I can talk because we both have geothermal, we both have PV on our house, and we're going to talk about efficiencies you can do that don't cost you a lot of money during this next part. But these are just a couple ideas that I pulled out of the last issue of The Economist. People talk about batteries. Battery technology isn't there, so we can't do anything with solar and wind. Solar's only there when the sun shines. Wind's only there when the wind blows. Well, what if you take the power from the wind plant and you use it to pump out an elevated island in the ocean? And you cause, as that's a picture on the left, you cause an empty swimming pool to be sitting there, all right? And then when you need the power, you open the gates on it that runs just through a hydroelectric plant with turbines, and you run and let it fill back up by its own force. It's a simple way to do things. The one on the right is, again, a gravity-powered hydro plant, where during the day you use either the solar or at the night the wind to pump the big chamber full. And then when you need it, you let the weight drop, pushes the fluid up through the turbine and runs it. You don't need a battery to store solar or wind energy. You can do it hydraulically. These are things that are on the table. And with that, I'll stop. I'm sure we'll have many ideas, and I thank you. Just remember, it's not waste, it's energy. Recycle everything you can, but don't put the rest in the landfill.
Okay, we're going to switch gears and go to transportation, but I just wanted to make sure that you all understood this issue of avoided cost, because I think it's kind of fundamental, and you went over that sort of quickly. So we have 75% of the state is covered by investor-owned utilities. You mentioned FPL. For those that don't know, that's the largest utility in the state, covers primarily South Florida, Sarasota, and so on. So the way utilities are incentivized is they make money by putting concrete in the ground. So they get a guaranteed rate of return on their capital expenditures. So they are disincentivized to help people use less energy. We're going to talk about efficiency in a minute, but I think it's important for people to understand why. So then if a utility says to you, I'd be happy to buy your renewable energy, Joe, but I can only buy it for what's called avoided cost. And I'm going to give you the layman's version. I sort of think of avoided cost as this kind of made up phony number that is theoretically avoiding the cost of the next increment of power. So the utility goes to their absolute lowest cost plant everywhere, but you could never build a new one. So really, the idea of avoided cost ought to be avoiding the cost of the next new power plant, which in the case of a new nuclear plant, Chef already said, was 24 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you want to come sell me energy and I'm a utility, I'm going to tell you I can buy it for 3 cents, 2 cents, 2 or 3 cents. So it's a little bit of a quagmire. So that avoided cost is very important, why clean renewable projects and energy don't move forward. So I just didn't want to let that to go without more explanation. So now we're going to move to transportation. And after the natural gas got bashed a little bit there on the price, we're going to let Chuck come up and defend.
Okay. So how do we get out of this?
There you go, magically.
Magically.
You have to go to the bottom. You have to pick it up.
Hmm?
You have to pick yours up at the bottom.
All right, I'm not sure which one mine is.
Working?
No. Oh, yeah, okay, let's see. I think we're this one.
That's one or the other.
There you go. There you go.
Hmm.
Here, maybe
Where's the other one?
I don't know.
Oh.
Yours up?
get the, we can't get the,
There you go.
there you go. And we need to get the, get up to the,
I won't count that against your time.
no, don't take it, please. All right, how do we get this to a PowerPoint, or to a program? You see that one? Oh, slideshow.
You might be able to go lower right-hand corner.
There you go. I think we did it. It's just sticky.
View show. Okay, I think that'll do it. All right. I want to talk about natural gas, and which is the available energy source now. I don't want to discount, though, all that was said here. Florida needs all of these solutions. Natural gas, though, is a solution we have today and is being used considerably in our economy today. It is America's energy. We have let's say later in the program, we have more natural gas in this country than Saudi Arabia has oil. We're just not using it the way we need to use it. It is energy efficient. It's 3 times more energy efficient to use natural gas as an end product than it is to use electricity, and I'll show you something on that in a minute. It's environmentally friendly. It's half the pollution of other energy sources. It's a lifestyle choice. Residents, businesses, and industry enjoy using natural gas. It's half the price of electricity. It's actually, in residential terms today, in the Clearwater gas territory, we're 61% less than the equivalent energy use with electric in the home. It's reliable. It's available after storms. People all over town are installing natural gas generators to be available in case we have a storm. And now in a national security end, it is available. It is an energy that we have in this country that I just mentioned, that we have more than Saudi Arabia, and it is an energy that can be used for natural gas vehicles. It makes no sense at all to continue to use the conventional gasoline-powered cars. We talked about today, from a national security standpoint, $1 billion to $1.5 billion a day is flowing out of this country's economy and going over to Saudi Arabia and other countries that don't particularly care for us, and that's just poor national policy. We talked about needing to have national and state energy policy. We have enough gas to meet the needs of our growing population within the state and across the country. We have more natural gas reserves in Saudi Arabia and has oil, and for 50 years we've used natural gas in Florida to maintain our use. The game changer in natural gas has been the shale discoveries. Across this country, vast shale fields have been discovered. That's the bedrock that all the oil and gas ever came from out of the earth. It's believed that every place we've ever discovered natural gas and oil in this country, there's 10 times that quantity still available in the shale rock below it. And you're hearing a lot about that in Pennsylvania and New York and across the country. There's a lot of that in the Northeast United States. But it's worldwide. You know, right now everybody's talking about the shale discoveries in the United States because we've developed how to get the shale. But we believe, the scientists believe, only about 27% of the shale across the world is in the United States. It's all over the world. So we'll see that get developed in the next few years. So when we talk about what's going to happen with the price of product, as the use of natural gas increases, we're going to see more and more drawn from the shale here in this country, and then more and more from the shale around the world. That's one of the reasons we don't see a lot of sense made to convert all these LNG stations to ship natural gas across the world, spend a bunch of United States bucks to do that, because before we get done with doing that, they're going to discover where they've already got it in the other countries and it isn't going to be needed there. And by the way, this chart doesn't include anything from Russia because we don't have statistics on how much shale is available there. From an efficiency standpoint, I told you that natural gas was more efficient than electricity. The process of making electricity in a power plant and transporting it to the end user wastes about 73% of the energy. Only 27% of the energy on average arrives at the plug at your house. That, when you talk about energy conservation, that just doesn't make sense. And so everywhere we can use natural gas, as an end use in the home directly is much better. About 90% of all the energy from natural gas is available at the home. About 10% is used to move it across the lines to get it to the home or the business. Natural gas is clean burning. It's between 30 and 50% less carbon dioxide and other particulates than oil and coal. Customers like natural gas for endless supply for cooking and for pool heating and heating homes. It's much more satisfactory. Industries use it for all kind of uses. Our largest customers are our business customers and restaurants and hotels and that. Again, half the cost of electric, lower carbon footprint. Businesses like Publix. Publix has been on a mission to install natural gas generators in all of the Publixes across the state. We're almost all through in this area converting all the Publixes and installing natural gas generators. Hospitals are converting to natural gas. Hospitals have to have on-site generation available, but they've also learned how to take the fuel oil and mix it with natural gas and get a longer supply of energy. Morton Plant just did that recently, and now Morton Plant can virtually go a month or more on the supply that they have on site with their generators. And then the sexy part of my presentation is the natural gas vehicles. They're big savings for both the environment and everything. What did the Clearwater Gas is owned by the city of Clearwater. So what did the city of Clearwater do? The first thing we did is what has been talked about already here is the city stepped back and looked at our own facilities and said, where are we wasting energy? And we identified about $3 million worth of energy projects in the city that have been done now, and that's going to save about $7.5 million over the next 15 years. Smart thing for every business to do. Look at what you got, figure out how to do it more efficiently in your own house. This next thing the city of Clearwater did was looked at the community and said, where's the savings in the community? What should we be promoting in the community? What the discovery of that study was that about 64% of all the emissions, the particulates that go into the air, come from electricity. Well, we're not going to do much about electricity other than to provide natural gas as an alternative way of making energy. That can reduce that, but the power plants produce a lot of emissions. The second big bar, though, was transportation. All the emissions that come from the vehicles in our society. So a solution is we looked at that and said, what can we do is Clearwater Gas System can be used to work on the transmission or the transportation issue, and we partnered with our solid waste department. The garbage trucks are tremendous heavy users of fossil fuels. Typical garbage truck gets about 2.8 miles per gallon during the course of the day, and so we looked at that and said the city of Clearwater's got about 70 garbage trucks. We could build a station and convert our garbage trucks to natural gas, and then also convert a number of utility vehicles and other fleet vehicles in the city, and also make that station available to the public and to other cities and other entities across Clearwater. We opened this public station in October of this year. We are operating at $2.19 per gas gallon equivalent. I think that's, if I had to say what's sexy about our presentation, it's $2.19 gas versus your nearly $4 gas that's probably going to go higher. We are the one fossil fuel that's been going down in price, not up in price, and that's evident in that price there. And there's opportunities now to partner. We've been talking to PSTA, the school board, cities like Dunedin and other cities around the state. This is a rendering of what our station looks like. We've got 2 islands with 4 pumps and 8 hoses, and we'll be able to serve. It's on Hercules Drive between Sunset Point and Drew Street. Here's a couple examples. We've got about vans. We've got about 13 Verizon vans already filling there on a daily basis. Buses, I can tell you the city of Tallahassee already has about 45 or 50 school buses converted to natural gas. Most of the large metropolitan cities around the country have already converted to natural gas buses. Hillsborough County has already made the commitment to go that direction, and Pinellas is looking at it right now. Garbage trucks across the state, the garbage fleets have converted many of them to natural gas. They have their own filling stations installed at their own facilities. This is a rendering of our natural gas car. We've got the Honda Civic GX is available now at the Honda Auto Waste store. You can have one of those cars. They get about 250 miles per fill up. It's a great car to get around town in. Problem is, we've got the station here. There's not stations across the state, so you can't really go out and drive it in distances. The trucks and utility trucks are being converted now as we speak, and then semis. There's a company in Lakeland right now that is just committed to about 25 semi trucks and installed their own station for that. So gas, again, is plentiful, energy efficient, environmentally friendly. It's a lifestyle choice. It's economical, reliable, and it's a national security issue. So with that, that's my presentation.
What a bunch of great cooperative panelists who all stated according to their time. So this is what we're going to do next. We're going to have some dialogue amongst the panelists, so you all be thinking if there's something one of the other panelists said. I wanted to just point out a couple things that jumped out at me to get you thinking, and then I wanted to ask Joe in a minute to talk a little bit about what things people can do now. So energy has always struck me. I've worked on a lot of different public interest issues over the course of my career, but energy is quite unique because it's something that is very international. We were looking at maps around the world of where shale gas is located, and it requires policy that's not only global, but U.S. policy. But at the same time, it's actually something which you can do something about. Every single person in this room makes choices, all day long that affects energy. So I know Joe wanted to speak to that because, like Steve, he has really done an enormous amount of effort in his own home, and he's got an electric bill that's like 37 cents or something. So anyway, Joe, you can stay right there because the mics on the table.
Okay.
So, and just talk. He wanted to run you through some questions about what you can do.
I think one of the things that we need to realize is that this really is a personal decision people make on lifestyle and what they are going to do. And I expect, what I'd like to do is get a show of hands as I ask some questions there. How many of you guys have actually done this yourself? And a lot of these things have no money involved with them at all, or not anything major. And I expect Steve Smith better raise his hand for every one of these, or I'm really going to be upset with him. First of all, how many of you, by raise of hands, have replaced as many as the incandescent bulbs in their house they can, replace them with CFC or LEDs?
Awesome.
Okay,
wow.
That's great.
Impressive.
How many of you have installed motion sensors on lighting in areas of low traffic so the light only comes on when you need it and it shuts itself off a minute or two later? How many of you turn off the fans and light in a room when you leave them? Okay? How many change your HVAC filters on a regular schedule to make sure you're not overworking your blowers? How many of you follow the 78 in the summer and 68 in the winter on your thermostat? Okay? We're doing good. How many have activated the sleep function on your PC so they don't sit there and grind when you walk out to get a sandwich? Okay? How many cook with natural gas as your primary cooking source? Propane counts. Yeah, propane counts. And use a microwave where possible rather than using electricity. Or high amounts of electricity, let's say. How many take advantage of your utilities promotions on Energy Office on ductwork inspections and installation upgrades?
My utility does.
Okay. How many of you maintain the weather stripping on your doors and your windows? Okay. How many, when you replace old appliances, make sure that you're buying a True Energy Star appliance? Okay. This is good. How many use the delay function on those Energy Star appliances you own, such as your dishwashers and your washing machine, so that you're using the power at low demand periods, not during the daytime? How many use the humidity sensor on your dryer so that your dryer doesn't run its full cycle, so it stops when the clothes are dry?
Did everyone get that issue of the time of day? Because this is very important, and this is where we're headed. Is there anyone in the room who remembers when you got nights and weekend minutes? Right? Like nobody pays any attention to that anymore, but it was a big deal. So this is sort of the equivalent of that. Right. So if you knew that if you ran your washer at 10 o'clock at night or 6 in the morning versus 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that it would cost less, how many of you would do that? So that's when we're talking about time of day.
It also
can I add a friendly minute? How many people still use a clothesline occasionally? Yeah, there you go. Because I mean, you know.
All right, Steve, you got. I was going to put that one in, but I didn't think that before many would do it in the summer.
I mean, we use both. My wife would kill me if I said every single time. But,
Right.
But it does.
It
works great.
Yeah, I only got a
Solar
few more
clothes
here.
dryers.
And now we're going to get to the ones that start costing. None of these up here are really costing any money for you because they're either things you can do or they're things you're going to replace. It's not going out and making a capital investment to make big changes. But now we'll start getting to a few of them. How many have installed or looked at installing passive solar lighting in dark areas, like skyscraper lights or solar tubes that allow you not to have to turn on a light? Okay? How many have active solar PV ventilation on your attic space that turns itself on when it's hot and the sun's shining on it? Okay? That can affect your heating and air conditioning by as much as 25%. Just lowering the attic space where a lot of the ductwork and the air handlers are. You're not having to cool that equipment down before it has to go to work. Okay?
How many don't use air conditioning?
Boy, that'd be great.
Wow.
You're better than I am. Yeah. All right, how many have installed heat reflective film on the south-faced windows in their house to reject heat from the house? Okay?
Trees and shadows.
Pardon me?
How about trees on the south?
See, exactly. Some places you can have them or not. I've got plenty of trees, but I still have the solar film. It still makes a difference. Okay? How many have a tankless gas water heater? Okay? All right? And how many have looked to when replacing their HVAC system to look at geothermal as a viable alternative? Okay?
I plan to.
Okay? And how many have a home PV system? I guess maybe me and Steve. Well, a few more. Good.
There you go.
How about a solar? How about solar hot water? Anybody?
Solar hot water is a good one too.
You doing geothermal hot water?
So those are things you can do now, but for the last couple, they don't really cost
Right.
any money. So.
Those ones. But when you do these types of things, you can really minimize your impact. Even with snowbirds in my house this last month on a constant basis, my biggest demand was the tankless water heater, burning natural gas, but I still was at a total of $37. And when I say $37, that includes basically 18 of that is the connection fee and the wiring insurance. I have to pay Progress Energy when I only paid them 34 cents for electricity during the month. All right?
That's what we
And
call
my natural
carrying
gas bill was
charges.
$24, and I can thank my friends from Iowa who never experienced not having running out of hot water with a tankless water heater. So with that, I mean, it can be done, and it makes sense. And you know, my wife thinks this is my midlife crisis is renewable energy, but I think I'm doing something that's worthwhile for the long term for treating the planet correctly.
That's
by
not
doing
the
these
worst
things.
midlife crisis, right? We're okay with that. But I think it's important to pull out that this is someone who's been working on energy issues for about 10 years and has the privilege of spending time with my friends in the legislature and talking to a lot of people who don't really eat and breathe and sleep energy. They don't always understand that this is not terribly complex, really. I mean, energy policy is kind of layered and complicated, but the fact that we can use less energy isn't as sort of mystical as everybody makes it out to be. So there are a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me I wanted you guys to comment on, and then we'll go in the same order, Steve and Jeff and Joe and then Chuck, was this issue of competition or the lack thereof. I know Chef and I, there's some of us, we spend time in Tallahassee, spend a lot of time with the Public Service Commissioner in legislative committee meetings talking in the back of the room. So we come away from knowing that the kind of policies that we need, like integrated resource planning, where you put the supply side and the demand side on a level playing field, we know that these things are integral, and we know we don't have these policies. So talk about the Public Service Commission and what's going on there. Why can't we get the kind of outcomes that we need to get? I wanted to hear more also perhaps from you, Steve, about states that are doing things well in the U.S. or in the South, perhaps North Carolina, other states that you might see as being an inspiration to Florida if we have more leadership here. And then really the issue of innovation and what's most promising. And I imagine, especially after last time, we had so many knowledgeable people in the audience. There'll be people in the audience bringing ideas forward in a little bit. But where is the cost going? And where's the most promising opportunities first? And then the last thing, I know, Joe, you may want to comment this, is, what happened this session? And there was some leadership that was provided by Commissioner Adam Putnam, our Agriculture Commissioner. The Energy Office, which was located in the Governor's office, has now been relocated about a year ago. And Commissioner Putnam, the very, 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 very modest bill that we got, hence the very many varies, it only happened because of Commissioner Putnam's leadership on that. So we can talk a little bit about that if anyone else wanted to comment on the legislature. Some of the policies that they've mentioned tonight, the needing a renewable portfolio standard, what's known as a target for renewable energy, we didn't get that. So nothing, there wasn't a hugely significant policy that passed, but a number of small opportunities did pass, and hopefully will generate.
Well, Susan, let me
go ahead.
Let me add.
You're first up.
Well, no, let me just add on the renewable energy target. Not only did it not pass this year, but the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, actually reversed itself from where it had set into motion, reviewing and setting up to do a renewable energy standard 3 or 4 years ago. They actually stripped all that language off the books this year. And so in a very real sense, we went backwards this year because of that reversal, because again, the failure to understand that this state is not looking out for its long-term best interest on energy, the fact that this state has continued to stifle its initiative and innovation that could come from actually setting a policy that unleashes the potential of renewable energy in the state. We have 30 states across the country that have established these policies, and Florida would be a prime state to do that. But for philosophical reasons, being a quote-unquote against a what is called a mandate, but really what that is that's getting a small percentage of your energy from clean renewable energy. The legislature actually stripped that language completely off the books this year. And I think that is a very negative step in the wrong direction.
Let me explain that for people. So what happened is in 2007, when Governor Charlie Crist was large and in charge, and he started to move the state more to clean energy, the Florida legislature directed the Florida Public Service Commission to begin rulemaking and to bring back a draft policy to the legislature, which they did in 2009. And at that time, Senator Jim King, who's since passed away, took the mantle as chair of the Energy Committee and moved it through the Senate, and then it went over to the House, and it was met with offshore oil drilling at the time. So we didn't get a policy. So we kind of went back and forth a lot about this in the legislature, about stripping that language out, which I wasn't particularly in favor of, but it was something that had been done. It just wasn't done to fruition. So part of what we're trying to do, and Steve referred to this earlier, Florida being the largest state without a market. So when you set a target and you set some sort of a goal, that creates a market because it allows people to make investments and to have new energy projects come into the state. So you're 100%, I'm with you.
So that's one. And then, as Joe mentioned, this avoided cost thing. What you have is basically state-sponsored monopolies that are not subject to any sort of competitive forces at all, that are able to largely dictate what is going on within the utility commission. When a regulator is beholden to the utility or the entity that it is supposed to regulate. The term of art is it's captured. Florida has a captured Public Service Commission, and the Public Service Commission does not look out for your long-term best interest, in my opinion. It is largely influenced by the utility companies, and that is a dysfunction that we experience in this state. And the only way to break through that is to get political leadership that is going to begin to address those issues and not be, more worried about whether they're going to get, their skyboxes at Progress Energy Stadium or whether they're going to get this, that, and the other, that they're really going to look out for what is in the long-term best interest for the citizens of the state. And I think natural gas is an important bridge fuel, but we do need to be looking at diversifying our portfolio. And Florida is lucky now that gas prices are low, and Florida has not gone down the coal-fired power plant path that it was heading down. Jeb Bush said we need to diversify, we're going to build a bunch of coal plants. Well, a number of us 5 or 6 years ago worked on stopping that. But what they stuck in place was, okay, if we're not going to build the coal plants, we're going to build these nuclear plants. Well, and then we passed this early cost recovery that now you're paying for. And what a number of us believe is critically missing, and Susan alluded to it, is there is not a good planning process that the commission, the Public Service Commission does, that is truly independent, where you put all your options on the table and you really do the analysis of where you not only work at controlling cost, but you also work at controlling risk. Because you can have things that are theoretically low cost, but actually if they don't work, they end up being very high risk. Or you can end up getting in a situation where you're too dependent on one resource while the cost is low, but you have a high risk that if those costs go up, you have exposed yourself. And so Florida right now is in a very precarious situation because it has been led down the primrose path by the utilities that to make these investments in things that they can get good for their shareholders, but put the citizens in a situation, at a very high risk situation. And I personally believe that it will come back and bite us. The beauty of renewable energy is that the price points are coming down. As you grow renewables over time, it continually drives the cost down. It not only ultimately gets you to a lower cost point, but it also hedges against those risks. It also lowers the long-term risk. That's what we need, and if we had a robust planning process in the state, we would get to that. But because we have a captive regulatory agency that is beholden to the utilities, and because we have no political leadership, and we actually have political backwards in this, where we're passing laws and we're stripping things off the book that could actually help the state, that's where we're setting ourselves up for some real, I think, high-level risk and ultimately some higher costs.
Chef? You're next, Chef.
Yeah, okay.
Your thoughts.
As an attorney, I would say I object to the form of the question because it's compound and there are too many questions there. What do you want me to talk about?
Well, any of those things that sort of jump out. How about competition? Or
Yeah.
you work with a lot of renewable energy producers, so why don't you just maybe speak to what their key barriers are to moving?
Pardon? I am going to apologize. I'm really not the right guy to talk about fracking. There's more science and engineering there than I know, and it's that simple. If it all works out, and I know there are some technologies being proposed that supposedly would permit fracking very cleanly and in an environmentally responsible way, if that turns out to be true, that'll be great. If the price of natural gas holds in the delivered $4 range, that's fine. But I'll tell you what, folks, in 2008, it went from $7.80 a million BTU delivered into Florida in January to $14 a million BTU delivered into Florida in June. There's a serious price risk, and that underscores the problem with relying on it so heavily. Go ahead, sir.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this week, a
let's hold questions to the end if you don't mind. So we'll go if someone doesn't know what hydraulic fracking is, they use chemicals to go down to help release natural gas, and there are concerns about whether or not that goes into the poison, goes into the water table, but so.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at a couple of things. Institutions and to some degree why things don't work. Actually, I think you've got to, I can explain what happened and what the justification given is, and why I don't agree with it. You've got a wonderful resource here, David Clement, a former public service commissioner, who may be able to shed some more light on the collective thought process of the PSC. But let's talk about efficiency and why we don't get what I think is the right amount of efficiency investment in Florida. The PSC applies certain tests to review conservation programs. They apply one called the rate impact measure test and the total resource cost test. There is another one which I think, as an economist, I would think this, called the societal, which is a test, which is a true benefit cost test. It says, if you do this or don't do this, these are the costs and these are the benefits. For decades, the PSC applied the rate impact measure test, and what that did was it said, if doing a conservation program causes people to save energy, there will be fixed costs that are spread back over other customers such that their rates will go up. We will not allow this unless there are certain capital cost savings, i.e. avoiding a power plant that can justify that plant. The result of using the RIM test, the rate impact measure test, is it basically shuts out pure energy savings, because energy savings reduces kilowatt hour sales, it reduces fuel usage, it saves a bunch of money, but it technically, arithmetically, causes rates to go up. Last pass, they did adopt the total resource cost methodology when they did the conservation goals. 2 utilities, Gulf and Tampa Electric, implemented their programs to meet those goals. The other 2, the PSC said, well, we're really concerned about the rate impacts of this. We're going to keep the goals where they are, but you don't have to change your programs. So there's nothing going on. I don't know what the cents per kilowatt hour saved works out to be, but my guess is it's probably in the 3, 4, 5, 6 cent range, and so it's probably not an optimizing decision. I mean, I'm an economist. I like to talk about optimizing. You really ought to look at it from a total societal perspective. What are the total benefits to Florida? What are the total costs to Florida of doing A, B, C, or D? On power supply procurement, I represent power plant developers, gas-fired, biomass-fired. You want to talk something sexy to me? The Gainesville Biomass Project is sexy to me, and here's why. It's coming out of the ground. When that plant is online, Gainesville is going to be reliant on imported fuels for about 54% of its total electric generation instead of 99% like the rest of the state. That's sexy to me. But talking about power supply procurement, the way it works is the PSC has rules called selection of generating capacity that require a utility to do a request for proposals before it can build a power plant subject to the certain statutes. Well, what happens then? They do the RFP process, and they come to the PSC and say, well, we did our RFP process, and we evaluated all the proposals we got, and by golly, ours was the best one. And I'll tell you, I participated in the original rulemaking docket in this in 1991. The rule took effect in January of 1992. In 20 years, folks, in 20 years of the existence of this rule and the utilities doing these RFPs, guess how many of the RFP processes have resulted in the selection of somebody other than the investor-owned utility?
Ah, lots of cookies.
0. And what happened? What happened? My clients, I mean, serious power plant developers with billions of dollars behind them, they said, we can't do business here. We'll see y'all later. We're out. So there's no effective competition there. Like I said, I'm an economist, and I've become,
You can tell, I mean, I like saving energy and I like the environment and all this stuff, but I've become really more kind of like a Milton Friedman type economic philosopher in my older age here. You got to let markets work, folks, because if you get the incentives right, the right things will happen. If you don't get the incentives right, they won't. What did I just talk about? There's no incentive for people to come invest money in this state to provide efficient power. They don't come. They say, you know, let us know when you get a more enlightened regulatory environment where we might have a chance of getting a contract. But what I'd like to see is a real auction. Just say, okay, everybody who wants to bid, and the utility can bid too. I'm fine with the utility bidding. Everybody who wants to bid gets to bid. We need so many megawatt hours, so many kilowatt hours for the next 30 years. You know, they said we need 8 million megawatt hours a year for the next 30 years. Submit your bid. Okay. You know, Calpine, American Renewables, Covanta, FPL, Progress, I don't care. Everybody come on down and bid. And I would do it with a blind electronic auction, and this is not rocket science, folks. This process, this technology, the auction technology, is used by most, if not all, of the transmission organizations to procure balancing power and other electrical resources. The City of New Smyrna Beach Utilities Commission, folks, procures all of its power using a blind electronic auction. You bid down, you know, the bidding starts at 10 cents a kilowatt hour or 12 cents, and it goes to 11 and a half and 11 and 10 and a half. And when you get to the low bid, the low bidders win. That's how it ought to work. And the catch is this. If one of my clients, Brother Treschler's company, gets a contract, and we say we're going to deliver waste energy power to you, or energy from waste power to you, or biomass power or solar power to you for 10 cents a kilowatt hour or 19 cents a kilowatt hour for 30 years, guess what? That's what we get paid.
That's it.
All I say is, if the utility wins, if they bid 9.5 cents and the next lowest bidder is 9.7 cents, the utility wins. But they get their bid price for the life of the contract. That's what competition's all about. That's the American economy at work. That's how it ought to work.
Joe, you want to pick up on that?
Go.
Yeah, I think he's hit an interesting point. And one of the things that, you know, people don't realize is the control of this whole system really is sitting in this room, because the Public Service Commission actually marches to what the legislature allows them to do. Legislation has to change for the Public Service Commission to be able to help any of this. So throwing stones at them right now doesn't help, because they're enforcing the rules as they sit on the books. And if you want to guess who the two largest lobbies in the state of Florida are, I will tell you one of them's healthcare. Can you guess what the other one is?
Energy.
Every time you pay your electric bill, you're lobbying against yourself, because they are the second largest lobbyist in the state of Florida. That's the problem. There is no incentive for the utility at this moment to do anything other than maximize its return on investment that it's allowed to have. They can only do that by brick and mortar. Municipal electric companies have a whole different purpose. They have more of the same kind of a purpose that we do. Service to their customers. Provide the service they've asked for and do it the cheapest way. That's not what the investor-owned utilities is. The business model isn't that way. It's not their fault. That's their business model. But we've allowed that business model to exist. The business model has to change. Some of the ways that could change is allow an investor-owned utility to have a return on investment on purchase power. Maybe then they might buy some and turn it around. Chef's idea of a reverse auction, it's not just using the power. We use it to buy commodities. We buy our carbon, we buy our lime, our pollution control, we buy it by reverse auction. It works well, very competitive, very reliable. And again, you get the price, and there's no going back and saying, oh, that's not what I meant. Oh, I need a fuel adjustment. Oh, you guaranteed it. That's what happens with an independent power producer who signs an agreement with an investor-owned utility. They commit to deliver at a certain price. If they can't deliver at a certain price, they can't go back to the ratepayer. They have to deliver at that price.
Part of what Joe's referencing is that the utilities, the investor-owned utilities, are in a position where they can go back.
Right.
So if that nuclear power plant starts to cost more, they just go and get more money. So that's the reference that you're
An
hearing.
independent power producer doesn't get that
And
right.
Chef, I know you had a little.
Okay, go ahead, Chef.
Yeah.
We're glad to share.
No,
with
I just wanted to follow on. In the PSC rulemaking proceedings on what they call the bidding rule, which really isn't bidding because it's not really bidding, my clients and I advocated exactly what Joe said, and that is we said, give the utility free money. Give them 10% of the savings between their cost and whatever contract they sign. If it's $1 billion over 20 years that they save by going with an independent producer, they would get 10% of that. And that hypothetically would be $100 million. We tried to get them to put that in the rule. Oh no, not going to happen. Sorry. We tried to get them to put auctions in the rule. In the more recent revision, they said, well, they actually amended the rule to say a utility may use an auction process to procure its power. It hasn't happened.
Well, I'd be a little harder on the Public Service Commission, and then we're gonna send it to Chuck over here than Joe was, because I think there are a lot of things like the rate impact measure, that cost benefit test, that was never a law, it was never a rule, it was just a practice that the Public Service Commission chose to use. And the first thing that the Public Service Commission does when they set conservation goals, when all the investor-owned utilities sit down to do that process, they employ a 2-year payback screen. So the first thing they do is they eliminate everything that has a 2-year payback or less. That's not a law, that's not a rule. And so there are 17 states around the country that we consider leaders that get a percentage or a percentage and a half of annual savings. Florida's at 0.25. 63 to 83% of their programs is the stuff that the Florida investor and utilities eliminate before we start the conversation. And they do that because of what I said earlier. The incentives are misaligned because they make money building power plants and they don't make money helping people be less, to be more efficient. So I would probably be a little tougher on the Public Service Commission than you. So Chuck, we'll bounce it over to you. You really talked about a different field that I think that's left to the side a lot, which is transportation. It's so much easier for us to pick on a big power plant because it's just kind of easier to see. Transportation's so diffused, and so anyway, you want to speak to that a little bit?
You know, everything in our business is based upon competition and payback. You know, the payback on a garbage truck, for instance, I didn't really say this, is we figure the garbage trucks are going to save about $15,000 a year on fuel cost. It's going to cost about $30,000 to buy a garbage truck with a natural gas engine versus one with a diesel engine. That will come down as more are built, but right now there's a premium you pay to get it. But that's still a 2-year payback on a vehicle that typically has lasted in our industry about 7 years. And our fleet people believe that a natural gas engine will last probably as much as 2 years longer in a garbage truck than its traditional diesel engine. So and have a lot less cost of maintenance over the life of the product. So you know, cities looking at that and saying, here, what's the payback? And that's why all the garbage companies across the state are moving that direction. There's a direct payback without any incentives. Without, you know, we believe there should be some federal incentives. We believe this $1.5 billion a day warrants doing something to speed the process up to get out from under it. But even in the absence of incentives, it pays for itself and people are making economic judgments on that. Years ago, probably now almost 10 years ago, Morton Plant looked at their air conditioning needs and decided to put a natural gas fired air conditioner in. They have a third of all the air conditioning in the downtown Morton Plant campus is done with a York air conditioning unit and they can play then. They have time-of-day rates. Large industries pay time-of-day rates. They pay more during the day than they pay at night. So Morton Plant uses their gas-fired generation during the day, runs their electric-fired air conditioning at night. Again, competition. That's what everybody needs to look at. Tankless water heaters. Before we started talking about the natural gas vehicles, tankless water heaters are about 20% of the operating cost of an electric water heater. And so that's most all our customers are going tankless today. They look at the cost benefit of a traditional tank water heater. They can save money with a traditional tank water heater versus electric. But when they look at the added savings of having tankless, they typically make that choice. And as one of our panelists said, the only bad thing about a tankless water heater is then you have a continual supply of hot water for your teenager to get in the shower and stay in the shower for hours and hours at a time. So you got to watch your water bill then. But competition is and payback are important things. Gas air conditioning is now coming into the. A few years ago, we had a York Triathlon home air conditioning unit. It was saving about half the price of air conditioning of the traditional heat pump that most people were using. The industry, though, York was making so much money off electric air conditioners that they decided to go out of the market with it. They discontinued their market line, their line, because they were committed, and I believe they had a lot of incentive from the electric guys to get out of the market. It was not. Now it's coming back now. There's a new product that's in the market today that the Japanese have used for years, and we'll see if we get another resurgence of gas air conditioning in residential and small commercial applications. It's called the Next Air. Anyway, that was comments I want to make. There was comments about fracking. Fracking certainly requires science. I mean, there is tremendous exaggerations when you saw things like the TV shows with the lighting of the water spigots and things like that. That wasn't fracking. That was a different issue altogether. But it made for good TV, and it won some awards and that kind of thing. Fracking, though, does require good environmental principles. The wells have to be done properly and to be safe from water. There's not been, there are most cases where people have looked to where, is this a pollution of water issue? It's not been. We believe it can be done safely and will be done. And then beyond, as we talk about supply and demand, what drives the price? The reason it went to $14 a decatherm a couple of years ago was everybody was converting the power plants over to natural gas, and the supply wasn't there, and so the price rose. Now with all the shale fields available, that's holding it down, and beyond that, the methane hydrates are the next frontier. There's thousands of years of methane hydrates in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and off the trenches off the coast and whatever. We just have to develop the technology of how to get those methane hydrates to work. But that will happen, because right now Japan has a tremendous volume of methane hydrates in the trench off of Japan, and they're hurting right now for their nuclear generation and whatever. I would predict that in the next couple of years you're going to see Japan figure out how to extract the methane hydrates, and that will create a whole new industry for where to get it.
Steve?
Well, a couple of things I want to say. Let me go here first. We as an organization have looked at the fracking issue, and when you look at how many people have actually seen a mountaintop removal site or ever been to a mountaintop removal site? I mean, the utter devastation that happens when you blow the top off a mountain to get coal is phenomenal. How many people have been at a uranium mining facility where you have the uranium tails and all this other kind of stuff? I mean, there's a lot of this stuff. So when you look at these extractive industries, none of them really have a great track record. The thing that our organization is most concerned about with fracking is that there are professional organizations that, if they follow all the rules, do appear to be able to do it with, in the grand scheme of what I just compared it to, minimal environmental impacts. What is very disconcerting to us is that there's a lot of wildcatters, or basically, rednecks with drilling rigs, that are going out and trying to jump into this gas, explosion that everybody's talking about, and getting up there and drilling in a less professional way. And there are issues that are materializing from that. Now, what we've tried to do is we've tried to actually reach out to the folks in the gas industry and say, it's in your best interest to go with us and assure that we have the proper regulatory mechanisms in place. The problem is the gas guys won't do it. They will not ever go and lobby with us to bring the regulations that are necessary. They'll do it, quote unquote, voluntarily, but they do not want to go into these areas where you have these shale fines and really work aggressively to get the proper regulation in place so that you can block out the wildcatters with these rigs that don't know what they're doing, which I think is where you're going to have most of the problems. That's one issue. The other issue that I would encourage you to think about is, and how many of y'all have done Ancestry.com? Have done any genealogical research and really sort of thought back? If you go back and think about what your forefathers or your grandmothers or whatever were doing, we have got to, as a society, begin to take a little bit of a longer view, because if the people that predated us, and they did, but if they had the technology that we have now and just completely exploited everything that could be exploited and left us a diminished world, I think we'd be having a much more different conversation, and we are rapidly heading that way. Natural gas is a resource, and I believe it's an important resource that can be a bridge, and it can get us to back off of coal, and it can get us to back off of some of the other more extractive. But we need to go beyond that, because if what we're going to do is we're going to go to natural gas and we're going to stop here and say, let's exploit the hell out of every single bit of natural gas we can, go after those methane hydrates, go after all this other kind of stuff, the world we're going to leave for our children and our grandchildren is going to be much, much more diminished. I think take advantage of the moment we have, and let's bridge from the more destructive technologies that we have to cleaner technologies. And if natural gas can provide some help there and we can do it in a clean way, so be it. But let's don't get locked on to natural gas as the solution, because it still emits 50% of the CO2 that carbon does. It still is an extractive resource, and it has a whole set of issues that we may not fully understand right now that we need to be mindful of. Let's move on, and as a society, gradually, instead of having to do it in draconian ways, make those transitions. That's why a target for renewable energy is so important. That's why continuing to grow this technology is so important. That's why I'm focusing on energy efficiency is so important. Because there are people that are going to make money at this that will exploit every single bit of it until it is gone and leave nothing for our children and our grandchildren and the future generations. And that's what worries me about the excitement about natural gas is we want to exploit the hell out of it as much as we can fully. And then if they start to have the fluctuations, variation, we need to take a longer view.
Okay, you get a quick comment, and then we're going to line up for questions. No, Chef, you're okay?
We're okay, go ahead.
Okay. So why don't we, if you have questions, if you come to the center aisle, David, you may ask a question, of course.
Thank you, Susan. I had no intention of saying anything more than I did, other than thank you for coming and good night. But some of the things that have been said, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on. First of all, I'm concerned that this seems like a legislature bashing session, and I don't want Representative Frisch to leave with that idea. It's not our intention. I know that a lot of this energy policy is driven by a small group of legislative leaders, not necessarily the rank and file, who I think want to do the right thing. But the forces in the legislature, have a great deal of power. I also wanted to say that for one brief shining moment in 2009 and 10, the PSC was free of utility influence, but it didn't last very long. And Mr. Wright was there. He witnessed it. I saw him every so often. But But we did try. But as I think Mr. Wright said, the PSC can only do what the legislature has given them permission to do. They have to follow the law. They couldn't go, off half-cocked. And we wanted to do more vigorous, robust efficiency goals, but we also were concerned about the recession. We were in the middle of the recession, and we worried about the effect on the consumer. I remember arguing for the price of one of these things was going to be 40 cents per month per the average household. And I said, the price of that's less than the price of a can of soda. And don't tell me anybody in this rich country is going to balk at the price of a Coke. So, but we did try, and we did we improved the goals. I don't know, I feel I'm rambling here, but I did want to say that. And I do have a question. Mr. Wright, you mentioned the Gainesville wood burning plant. One of the last votes I made on the PSC was to approve that plant for future use. And the next day, I went to my allergist. You probably know him. He screamed at me. He literally screamed at me for doing that. He said, you could have stopped it. Do you know how many thousands of people with asthma whose health you have hurt by this vote? So what about the cleanliness of that method and maybe Mr. Trashler, the waste to energy? Is this clean or isn't it? And Mr. Warrington, the fracking concerns, I could go on, but I better stop.
I'd really like to be the first to respond to that. First, I'm going to start by saying, not only did the Public Service Commission, when David Clement and his colleagues were there, try, they succeeded. They made some of the best votes, most informed, sound decisions that I've seen the Public Service Commission make in the 30 years now that I've been doing it. Hear, hear.
Just in case people don't know, David is the director of the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions here at St. Petersburg College, and he was an editor at the Bradenton Herald for about 30 years, and then was put on the Public Service Commission by Charlie Crist, along with Ben Stevens, and then the two of the existing commissioners, Nancy Argentiano and Nathan Scott, formed a more consumer-friendly, so that's what David's referring to. When Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and Natural Resources Defense Council were in the proceeding to set conservation goals, we went from 0.25 to 0.35. Remember, I told you the leaders were at 1% or 1.5%, but that was real progress. And one thing I did want you to mention, Steve, before we leave here, are the two Supreme Court cases. So Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is taking the Public Service Commission to the Florida Supreme Court, because what they did was they threw out very recently the goals for half the state. So we're now operating on 7-year-old goals. So that's one of the cases. The other case has to do with the constitutionality of early cost recovery. So look for those Supreme Court cases, which are going to start here pretty quickly. But so David was a bright spot, and what happened is David was not confirmed by the Senate. So I know I'm not allowed to legislature bash. However, it was the Senate that did not confirm you, your position. So
and anyway, it was a close vote too.
We're not bashing, Jim.
There were many senators there who got it. It was only 4 votes.
Sure.
So a lot of them got it.
It's true. The whole legislative process is very leadership driven. We're really, and this was my 24th legislative session, so I've seen a lot of it. I've never seen the power be so concentrated. Representative First, would you agree with me, in a relative few number of people? So that's part of what happens. So we can't bash everybody. We can.
But on our Supreme Court,
I don't want to hog the floor, but I want to let the
yeah, absolutely. We want people to line up if you have a question. Go ahead.
Let me just say, if you are interested in the Supreme Court challenges that we have, you can visit our website and find out more about that. But we are also asking people to contact their elected officials and ask them to join. We've had now several, I think we're up to 4 of the elected officials have signed on to what are called Friends of the Court briefs, supporting the fact that the nuclear cost recovery needs to be repealed. And I think that that is something that you can ask your elected officials to do because you're tired of having to give free money to the utilities. And I think it would be an important thing to do.
Chef, have one more comment, and then we'll go to...
I did want to answer David's question about the biomass plant. He and I shared, past tense, the same allergist asthma specialist in Tallahassee. He fired me as his patient. I'm not making this up. He fired me as his patient because I represented the Gainesville Biomass Project in the proceedings at the PSC, and two of my partners represented the Biomass Project in the environmental proceedings. Here's the answer to David's question, though. And David may remember this. In the hearing, I asked our doctor. Oh, no, I just wasn't going to say his name. I was going to be polite. I asked the doctor, I said, have you done any comparative analysis of the relative air pollution if this plant is built versus if it's not built? Well, no, I haven't. It's an important question because about 60% of the fuel supply for the Gainesville biomass plant is going to be forest residues, tops and leavings, undesirable species, much of which, probably half to 2/3 of which, is pushed into windrows and burned in the field. And our doctor said, oh, this the air shed mixes and all this stuff. And I said, sure it does, but here's the thing. So you got half your fuel supply. If you burn it in the field anyway, that's 100% of the particulate air pollution going up there. If you burn it in the power plant, there's a 99+% removal rate of the air pollution such that it's cleaner. And in the environmental hearing, the administrative law judge actually made findings that it was cleaner, less total emission loading with the plant in place than without it. That's the response to that. My point's simple. You need to look at everything. You want to talk about solar? How many acres is solar going to take up if you really want to have 5,000 megawatts of solar, at the rate of something like 200 acres per 25 megawatts. That's a lot of acres, folks. We got it. We've got 36 million acres of land in the state of Florida. We can devote a few thousand acres or even 100,000 acres out of 37 million to solar. But you need to look at all this stuff. What's the impact going to be, and what's the best decision? Thank you.
Great. So with questions, if you could keep your question to a minute, and if you have it to direct to a specific panelist.
Okay, I have, for Mr. Wright, I just have to confirm what he said. As being a registered engineer and having designed those biomass plants, they do have state-of-the-art pollution controls on them, and having worked in the forestry industry, I know that when they burn the windrows, they don't just meter it out. They wait till the wind's going in the correct direction so they won't set the forest fire, and they torch it all at once. So it's a much bigger discharge when it comes, and it goes further and has a lot larger impact. So go back and tell your doctor that.
He doesn't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
he's not speaking to any of us, really.
Another thing is that the utilities, they do consider risk, and what they're considering now is the risk of being jerked around in the regulations and in the public view, and the natural gas is the easiest to sell. So the utilities are very much in a herd instinct. The herd of them will all go to natural gas because they're afraid of being panicked by the public. But one question, the one question that I have is for Mr. Is it Threshler? You mentioned that you had about 1% of the generation in the state, and there was about 1% of renewable. So you just about have it all. The question that I have is, being that there is a benefit in having the landfills and letting the water percolate through it and go into our drinking water, have you ever broached the issue that with the repeal of PURPA 210, which created this this last-in fictitious unit, now they're no longer bound by federal law to consider that. Have you ever considered going back to the PSC and the legislature and say, hey, why don't we have some sort of common allocation where instead of building these landfills, we build waste-to-energy facilities and get rid of this problem?
I think we have probably tried every angle we can, and the answer always comes back. The existing rules are that other facilities are judged against the avoided cost calculation, and there is no public benefit allowed in that calculation. And because that's one of the things I always say is when you have a waste energy facility, you're solving more than one problem for a community. You're handling the waste that they're not able to recycle in the most highly environmentally sound way of doing it, and you're also lowering, negative greenhouse gas producer and generating electricity. But that benefit doesn't go in the calculation. I think that the biggest problem you end up with is there are people who, without experience, will try to accept those deals, and they will try to accept that avoided cost. And there's a lot of publicity when Progress Energy or someone else signs a deal for a new renewable project, but then find out how many of those projects ever got built at the avoided cost number. The company goes to Wall Street, they look for financing, they look at the performance, there's no way these guys can make a profit or properly maintain the facility, and the project dies.
The bank's engineer, I used to do that, and there are very few of them that make it past the threshold.
That's right.
But I still think the solution is to lobby the legislature, lobby the PSC, and get the message out there in the public that when you have a landfill, you're percolating through everybody's garbage into the drinking water.
It's true.
So
Thank
I
you
will
very
say-
much.
Thank
No, it's
you.
a very good point about landfills. Yeah.
What I heard tonight makes me think of Amory Lovins's quip, one of my favorites. We're not looking to see how much energy we can use. We're looking for a hot shower and a cold beer. And the Rocky Mountain Institute in Snowmass, Colorado, they've had temperatures lower than 40 below zero, and it was built without a furnace. You don't need these ground source types of systems like you people have. It's a waste. And in this National Geographic special here, Energy for Tomorrow, he's interviewed and he states, after the question was asked, who popularized the term negawatt, what are negawatts and why should we care about them? Well, he didn't popularize it. He coined the term negawatt, and he states that negawatts are watts saved by more efficient use. It's enormously cheaper, probably 8 times cheaper on average to save electricity than to make it. Now,
I think you've got a lot of agreement up here on that. Did you have a question?
this is literally a farce. This building alone, the lighting system, has over 3 times the wattage necessary because you don't have imaging specular reflectors. St. Pete College just made a new building up there on Ulmerton that's a monument to ignorance. You keep on making the stupid buildings, the hole keeps getting deeper.
So do you have a question?
You can't answer any questions.
Well, unfortunately, none of us are responsible for the efficiency of St. Pete College, but we will make sure they're looking at that. Kathy.
Well, I will say that St. Pete College does have some amazing sustainability programs, and we're grateful for that. Kathy Harrelson, I live in St. Pete. I wear a number of hats. I'm an environmental activist and also working in business development for solar and other alternative energies. Also work on trying to move PACE through communities in Florida.
PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is a financing mechanism.
Right, and I think the financing mechanism side is, maybe that's what your third forum is going to be about, I hope, but it's an important discussion. But it's so frustrating. It seems like we just keep hitting walls every time. And of course, this is mostly with large-scale power, and I would like to point out to Chef, there still are a lot of rooftops out there that we could use without going to that acreage. But, okay, I'm just going to ask, and this could be for both of you, I think, Stephen and Chef, it sounds to me like, because these are essentially state-sponsored monopolies, the only reason they're allowed to exist is because of the PSC. Is that because there is a presumed, shall we say, ombudsman that stands in between the citizens and the utilities? How could we possibly not think about an antitrust suit here? And is that being done? Question. Well, those laws have been around for 100 years, or longer. Also, does that give us any ground to possibly break franchise agreements on a municipal level with utilities? And maybe I'm just curious. So if you have some answers, I appreciate it.
Chef, go ahead.
Real quick, here on the rooftops, and if we get to third gen, we're there. Or if you got a big enough roof, we're there even with 1.5 gen solar. That's great. It's not quite accurate to say that the utilities are state-sponsored monopolies or that they are sponsored by the PSC. The power companies existed before the PSC got electric regulatory authority. The regulation used to vest in local governments. Utilities and like that, we got a statewide regulation, which makes a lot of sense if you're going to have regulation. That's another conversation. The answer to your antitrust question, the answer to your antitrust question is very simple and straightforward. There is a doctrine in the antitrust laws called the State Action Immunity Doctrine, which holds that a business that is subject to regulation, economic regulation on a continuing and ongoing basis, is immune from antitrust. So that's the answer to that. And I do a lot of franchise work. And I will tell you, I am sorry, but what you talk about and what we have does not provide the basis to break franchise agreement. Consideration of the franchise agreement is what it is. They get to use the rights of way. They collect and pay the franchise fee, which is my frustration, because it's not their money, folks. It's your money. They're a collection agent. They pass it through to the city. It looks like a tax. It quacks like a tax, but it's a franchise fee because it's a payment for use of the rights of ways, and that's what it is. But no, there's no basis to break the franchise agreement. The only thing you can do is wait till your franchise agreement's up and go down to your city commission meeting and pound on the table and talk about these things.
And I've done a few of those. Good luck.
But Chef, and I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on television, but I do believe that the monopoly that the IOUs have is actually state-sponsored. In other words, they are granted the monopoly territory to deliver service. They don't, I mean, there is a relationship between the state and the monopoly area they serve. My point is that the state can require the utilities to do certain things, and that's where we've got to get more involved as citizens, and the legislature's got to get more involved, and ultimately the legislatures and the governor's got to make sure that we have, David's point is well taken. There was a brief period there where we had some independence, but we've got to get a regulatory body that does actually regulate and provide oversight. But the utilities are given a defined monopoly service territory with an agreement that they're going to basically provide that service, and that is granted to them by the state. As I understand, now again, Chef may have the nuance of that, but the utilities don't pick and choose necessarily without some engagement with the state about how they're going to have this monopoly area, so you don't have redundancy with wires and this kind of other stuff. There was an agreement there, and I think the point I'm trying to make is that we can require the utilities to begin to go in new directions with providing cleaner resources, providing the diversity resource, and do planning that actually gets us the low-cost, most environmentally beneficial planning, because it is being done in other states in the United States, and there's no reason why it can't be done in Florida. Well, the legislature, it is correct that the Public Service Commission is a creature of the legislature, and but I honestly believe, because we've been engaged before the Public Service Commission many times, there are choices that commissioners make. They have wiggle room within the laws, and many times they are not choosing, in my opinion, they are not choosing what is in the consumer's interest. They're choosing what's in the power company's interest. Now, again, the boundaries are defined by the legislature, but there's wiggle room within how those decisions are made. And we believe that too many times the decisions are made in the interest of the power company over the consumer.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'd like to bring up the issue of power generated by geothermal. Okay, you mentioned it on a small scale for water heating or something like that. But to me, geothermal, which I assume is where Iceland gets a lot of their electric power from.
Absolutely.
That there's power plants that are well designed and they know what they're doing there. To me, they're the best replacement for nuclear power plants because they're located. You can locate them near the site of where the power is needed. And we have the earth right below us that has the power, has the heat in it, that could provide the means of power. And you really didn't bring that up. I don't know why that is sort of minimized as opposed to the other approaches to commercial
can
power.
I respond very quickly to that? I mean, we support geothermal where it is available, but it is not available universally throughout. And there are different techniques that have been tried to try to make it more available, but there has been some issues with that technology. But in places like Iceland, there's places in California, there are other places around the world where you have the availability of that particular resource, it absolutely should be exploited.
Hawaii is a place like that.
Sure. But I don't think it's a viable option to my knowledge other than either ground source here in Florida, because you just don't have large geological reserves that help with it here. So I don't think it's an option for our state.
It seems to me that it's, the temperature, I don't know what temperatures you need as far as a heat source, but as farther down you go, I suppose there's heat available. They get heat from water, from ocean.
Well, there has been an active discussion about using some of the thermal differences of the ocean to do that, which I guess is a form of geothermal, but not traditionally.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a very important resource where it's available.
Is there anybody doing active in doing? I know there's a company that started a plant out in California, but there's some issues there. I'm not sure what is, but they don't seem to have been very successful. I forget the name of the company, but what was that?
There are geothermal near Bakersfield and that there.
Yeah.
Where there's definitely there's several hundred megawatts of geothermal there. But again, that is different geothermal than we were talking about for HVAC purposes, because that's basically being used as a heat sink more and a heat source rather than an energy source.
I think the deal in Florida is pretty simple. You'd have to drill the wells so deep to get to where it's hot enough to flash the water into steam that it just doesn't make economic sense. I think that's the deal with with geothermal electric generation in Florida.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions in the audience? Time to line up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a snowbird, so I'm not a Florida resident. And when I saw the ad in the newspaper, what I was hoping to see or listen to was a lot of interesting information about the options for power generation. I got educated on Florida politics. Didn't hear much about the practicalities, and I'm an engineer. A couple of questions I'd like to ask. One, I remember perhaps back in the 80s, there was a lot of excitement about the Gulf Stream and using it to generate power. And that deals with the Achilles heel of renewables, because it's 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It seems to have dropped off the screen, and I was wondering why. It seems like an enormous resource that's unique to Florida. The other question I had was, when Joseph talked about these containers, where you can store electricity and use it at night when the wind doesn't blow perhaps and the sun doesn't shine, that's a concept. I mean, we need thousands of megawatts even at night. Has anyone figured out how big these things have to be, and if you can practically build them, and how much they'd cost? You know, we get a little bit of focus for an engineer on the practicalities. I'd appreciate it rather than the politics. Thanks.
Well, I think, though, what you hear, though, is one of the big barriers to moving these things in Florida, unfortunately, is politics, because there's sort of a lock on things. So it becomes hard to get to that next conversation. I wanted to mention the Florida Atlantic University, though, because they're the ones that are doing the research on the energy from the Gulf Stream, and they have a Center for Excellence there. And it did get a lot of sort of, you know, fanfare when they first started and got some big grants. So you haven't heard much, but they're still very active. We just had a presentation in the legislature from FAU on that. So
it's an enormous power resource.
Yeah.
Well, it is. And your other point, and this is what Joe and I were actually talking about his slides, if you go to up just north to near Chattanooga, the Tennessee Valley Authority has a pump hydro station, which is basically the same concept that he was talking about. And that thing can swing. They can pump up, I want to say it's, what the swing is, they can use about 2,000 megawatts to pump up at night, and then they can drop it. So what ends up happening is it's a problem for some utilities at night, the turn down rates, where they've actually got to turn down some of their plants because you have, you know, people's usage kind of goes up at peaks and then it drops way off. It's not good for a power plant to be turned on and off as a generalist as a gas plant, but a lot of the coal plants and the nuclear plants don't do that. That's why they want to run them 24/7, because of, you know, and this, that, and the other. But this concept of pumping at night and then dropping during peak times is being used all over the world in pump storage. There's compressed natural gas, compressed air gas. In northern Alabama's got a facility there outside of Gadsden they've been doing, and there's been other things. And so I think Joe's point is that you don't have to use an electrochemical battery. There's other mechanical ways that you can.
And I think where I was trying to go is one of the biggest problems that they have with wind out west is there's no demand for it a large part of the time, so they're freewheeling.
Yeah.
Even if it was more expensive on the capital side to start, taking that energy, using it into a pump storage, where you can then use the electricity or the energy when you want it, gives you tremendous flexibility going forward. And that's what I'm saying is we can't just keep saying, well, we can't do more solar or we can't do more wind because we haven't developed battery technology. There are other practical ways to do it.
I just wonder if anyone has any idea, are we talking, you know, about 1% of the requirement or 100%? Could be pump storage, or, you know, it's trying to get a feel for, is this a small part of the solution, or could that kind of a solution plus renewables really perform the whole job?
Well, you know, my understanding is that there is, and this has been said, and I'd have to go back, I don't have the documentation at my fingertips, but it has been said there's enough wind potential from Texas up to the Dakotas that, you know, you could generate the power we need in this country. The problem is it's not near the load center, so you have a transmission issue with, and that's why the concept of high voltage DC lines which is high voltage direct current lines, so you can transmit it over a greater distance. And then this issue of the timing of when the power is available, because wind tends to be stronger at night, and that's when you tend to have less demand. So if you had, in theory, if you had enough storage capability and you had an ability to wield it to the right place, you know, it could be a major part of the issue. And there are active discussions right now. There's several high voltage DC lines, direct current lines, that are being proposed to move the power from the plains to the load centers in the eastern United States. And there's an active discussion going on about that. Again, this country needs a coherent energy policy that actually promotes that.
Absolutely, and both of you were saying that. You know, you have to look at the big picture.
Exactly.
You can't just go natural gas, you can't just go solar. You have to look at the big picture. What are you going to do at night? You know, the whole spectrum.
Right.
Thanks.
The other big thing is offshore wind from basically Georgia up to Maine is a phenomenal resource. And it's, you know, again, the price points are high, but they will come down just as wind has come down, because wind is, well, until natural gas's most recent drop in price, but wind was getting to be competitive with natural gas on land, and, you know, you get these large turbines that can be, you know, the largest land turbine is roughly, 2.5 megawatts. But the ones out in the North Atlantic and everything, they're starting to approach 4 or 5 megawatts, as I understand it. So you get these larger turbines, and you'll get the economy scale reduction. Our organization honestly believes that you can actually bring a significant amount of clean wind power into the southeast United States from both offshore and from the plains, and you could actually firm it up if you don't have the storage with natural gas, and you could in essence deliver a dispatchable power that could be utilized, where you wouldn't have to use as much natural gas when the wind's blowing, but when the wind's not blowing, then you back it up with natural gas. And there's a way that you could actually use natural gas is flexible like that you could actually back up a lot of renewable energy, because the biggest concerns the utility has is, they're trying to meet a demand, and then all of a sudden power drops, either the clouds, take a lot of power out, or the wind doesn't blow, and you need something that you can sort of dispatch immediately. Coal and nuclear don't do that well, but gas can, and so that's one of the things that we think gas can provide. Again, until some of the storage comes up, it can provide some ability to firm up the intermittent resources.
Thanks very much.
Good. Next question.
Hi. I have 2 questions. I read about 5 years ago that Gainesville, the city council passed a law there where the power company paid back more money for PV power than it cost the consumer.
It's called the feed-in tariff, right?
That's right, the feed-in tariff, thank you. Anyway, were the situations unique to Gainesville that they were able to do that, or is it possible, do you think, to lobby like the local St. Pete City Council to try to get them to pass a law? In other words, do they have the power to say to Florida Progress, renewable energy is much more valuable than fossil fuel energy, so we're going to make you pay customers more? Is that possible to accomplish here in St. Petersburg?
Well, Gainesville is a municipal electric company, so they have a little different area.
Yeah, the St. Pete City Commission or the Pinellas County Commission cannot tell Progress what to do. Gainesville owns its own electric system. It's actually just a department of city government. So in that regard, it was different, and it is different.
And if I might add, Gainesville and Tallahassee both are example cities where they own their electric system as well as their natural gas system. So they can do things where they can play one off the other when it's the best to do, whichever one is the best energy source for the particular issue. And that's a major difference between those of us who we serve natural gas, but our whole territory is served by Progress Energy. So you're going to use them for the electric, and like you say, they're not going to be doing that.
And that's kind of the point I was trying to make with the municipal electric generators and utilities. Their guideline and their charter is service to their customers, not to their stockholders.
Right.
Their stakeholders are their customers.
Right. Thank you. I thought that was the case.
We didn't catch that, but come on up to the microphone, because none of us could hear what you were saying. Go ahead and finish your question.
Anyway, my second question is, my husband and I are thinking of a PV installation, and the two of you that have them, what mistakes did you make, and what would you change about your installations? What can we learn from you?
I wish I was about 2 years later in doing mine so that I could have bought panels that had individual inverters built into them to send AC power down, rather than very nice panels that I send all that DC power down to a $5,000 inverter that can blow up.
Got it. Okay.
And the older panels in the bases, because they are DC operated and they run like your old Christmas tree lights, if you get shade over a portion of your grid, it degrades that whole section of the grid, just not the panel. With the inverter built into the panel, the shade would only affect that panel.
Exactly.
And not the balance of the grid. That would be the only thing I would do. I'm very satisfied with my system. My panels were U.S. built. My inverters are German. But bottom line is, I'd do it again tomorrow, even though I only got half the rebate I was supposed to get.
Right.
How about you, Steve, Mr. Smith? Say
well, I think that Joe's point is a good one. I mean, about the technology continues to evolve. I've seen, I put mine on in February of 2009, and I've seen probably close to a 25 to 30% drop in the price again, I used panels manufactured in the southeast United States, Sharp Solar in Memphis, Tennessee. But I have been absolutely, you've heard that sort of priceless saying. The look that I get when I bring people to my house and they get to see the meter run backwards is priceless. I mean, there is absolutely something about that is phenomenal. And the utility now has since changed it where they will keep the meters separate, so they have two separate meters, so you can't run your meter backwards. Because I think it's a very subversive concept to basically see your meter running backwards. But it is absolutely where we need to go. And I have seen them work. They work very well. I have the solar hot water heater that works very, very well also, and have been very pleased with that. And then we have the solar tube. So if you're getting into solar, the solar tube daylighting is the least cost that you can do. You can get that for a few $100, and it makes a big difference, really changes the whole atmosphere of your house. And then solar thermal is the next most cost-effective thing, and you get the quicker payback with it because it makes a lot of sense. And then think about PV. But I always tell everybody, make sure you make your efficiency investments first. Because you want to get your home to be as energy efficient. So if it's a choice between a PV panel and a new refrigerator that's more efficient, or a Energy Star washer, whatever, or any of the technologies, do those first, because that is absolutely the biggest bang for your buck. And then think about, and the PV panels were actually the last thing that we did, because we methodically sort of worked through the list and worked our way towards them.
Okay, we got two more questions, and then David, you'll come back up and break us down.
Bob Huddick, I'm from Seminole. I just recently took a sustainable Floridian course with the extension. We have a community garden. We try to do all the low-hanging fruit stuff everybody was talking about. But there needs to be a paradigm shift and a sense of urgency by the whole citizenry. It's just not happening. This oxymoron of clean coal or natural gas. I've seen the director at Petersburg College that, this poo-poo and this thing of gaslighting gas. The lady went around and interviewed it. I don't think she's lying. I mean, if you want to see these commercials with happy cows and these polluted meat and the E. coli in the system, you have a decision to make. You believe these advertisements and the clean coal. Is it going to be cheaper? In the long run, things are cheaper. But there's a price for everything we buy, and you got to vote with your dollar you spend, and you have to be informed.
Let me reinforce that. I absolutely believe there's no such thing as clean coal, because I have seen it from cradle to grave. 30 miles from my house, the Kingston coal plant burst its ash. You mine this stuff, it's incredibly destructive. You then burn it, and then the residue is, as they add more pollution controls, which is a good thing, but what it does is it concentrates what used to go into the atmosphere into the ash, and then the ash becomes, the ash residues become a big problem. And so there's absolutely no such thing as clean coal. The other thing that I would emphasize is that, Chef talked about the market. One of the biggest market failures is that we don't include the externality cost into the full cost. So coal is not cheap. That is a misnomer. It is extremely expensive. It's just that we are passing those costs either onto people's health care bills, land destruction, or what we're doing for future generations. If the market was functioning, you would bring those external costs in, and coal would not be the cheapest resource out there. But we have allowed them to, quote unquote, sort of slip the noose by letting these external costs not be dealt with properly. We're gradually beginning to do it, but we can't even get this administration to pass a coal ash rule, even though they promised to do it. And there's, they're trying to do things incrementally, but we're not getting the full cost brought back in so that we can have, I think renewables could compete today if you basically were to eliminate a lot of the subsidization, and then you were to pay the full cost from the externalities. I think we'd be talking about a whole different thing.
And
so,
something un-American, use less.
That's right.
Conserve and use less.
There you go.
I'd like to just condole me. One quick quote from Aldo Leopold. "We abuse the land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see the land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect.
You're here.
You're here.
Here, here.
Yes, sir. Hi.
Thank you. Excuse me, I have two comments. Number one, I've never heard anybody try to use the local building codes to promote solar energy. Now, some of these codes will tell you how many plugs, how many outlets you have to have in a room, how big your windows can be, how many doors you have. Nobody is requiring or saying that you can't have an electric or gas water heater, that you must have a solar water heater. Why isn't anybody approaching that?
Well, a local government could.
And on the local basis, you know, we don't have to go to the PSC for that.
Probably has more to do just with the bandwidth of being able to spend the energy that it takes, the human energy, to go to all the local governments or some number.
Start with one.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong here because I haven't been to Israel, but my understanding is that you can't build a new house in Israel without it having a solar hot water heater on. And, you know, it's, for a state like Florida, you would, I mean, you'd have to get that through, you know, the builders and all these other kind of people that would interfere with that politically. But, you know, you could require that, you should require that some of this stuff is building integrated into these homes, and then have it roll into the mortgage, and it would dramatically eliminate a lot of these sort of upfront costs that people.
One of the things, though, that you may not realize, in a lot of new public buildings, there's what are called the LEED standards, where they have to push for certain. Communities can require the new buildings to hit certain levels of LEED standards. I can tell you right now, Palm Beach County, in building their new waste-to-energy facility, they required that the bidders all bid the administration area to be a platinum LEEDs building, which, and to have solar power on it and to minimize it. But that's a direction that can be pushed down to the local level, but at least you could start doing it in your new public buildings to set an example.
I'll give you one more. One of the provisions of the energy bill that just passed allows for local governments to pass a local infrastructure tax like they do with roads, and they just added energy efficiency. So we've been having internal conversations about whether or not we pick the 5 biggest counties in the state or do something really similar to what you're suggesting. So
You mentioned Israel. If you go to France, you'll see along the highways and on the farms, fields of windmills like that everywhere. Everywhere. Do you see any in Florida?
No.
No. Okay, I just want to thank you for having this forum.
Oh, well, thank you for being here.
Because I've had a lot of questions and a lot of them were answered here tonight. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and I still get my local paper. And every few months, I read in there where a high school has finished solarizing the roof, putting a solar field on the roof, or some gentleman is building a solar farm on his farm. And one man went so far as to put up one of those 350-foot windmills in his industrial complex, and he's furnishing the electricity for the complex. And I don't see that here, right? And now I see why. Thank you very much.
Okay, last question, and Dave, if you want to come up, go ahead. We'll let you wrap it up.
Hi, I'm a snowbird. My name is Ellen Gibson. I'm from Buffalo, New York. Buffalo recently passed an ordinance forbidding fracking in the city limits, which is, you know, not likely to happen just because of our geology there. But the more important thing was that the frackers were trying to dispose of the fracking fluids that come back up. There's an underground water pollution issue during the process, but there's also always a flushing up of stuff. And since the frackers do not disclose and are not required to disclose various fluids that they're using, nobody knows what they are. Well, they came to our sewer authority on the Niagara River, about to flow over Niagara Falls, everybody, and wanted to use our facility to dispose of their endless truckloads of fracking fluid. And apparently 1 or 2 slipped through before somebody tumbled to what was going on. And then the city council, to its eternal credit, has forbidden this now by ordinance. And I just feel that, you know, in these serious matters of the environment, that local people do have to go down and start banging on those tables. You know, they really do, at the city level and of course at the state level, which is so far away from Tampa. It's a great inconvenience to the citizens, I'm sure, but it's what got to happen.
Well, the policy piece is very relevant in that because initially fracking was exempt from the Clean Water Act. So there's a reason that these dynamics existed. So
Yeah,
that was
I mean,
politics.
You might just say that again. I mean, that was written in right from the get-go. Unbelievable. Now they're trying to undo that, and the EPA is supposed to be coming out with some rules.
Yeah, there's a lot of
If
attention
you want to
being
see how
paid.
not to do it, go about 100 miles south of Buffalo, New York to Pennsylvania, where I see a lot of parallels with Florida, people. And, you know, things are pretty lax down there, environmentally speaking. There's hundreds and hundreds of these things, and they're trying to get their stuff up into the Niagara River. Heaven knows what they're dumping into down there, where there are lots of trout streams and waterways of all sorts, including Lake Erie, which then will come by Buffalo again, so.
Very good. David, if you come up. So I want to thank all of you all for being here and digging into the issues, especially to my panelists who traveled a long way, particularly. So, and David and the college for providing us the opportunity to have this important discussion.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, panel. It was a small crowd, but it was a huge forum and distribution of information that was just so provocative. And I'd like to say to Mr. Smith that he provided the analogy we needed for sexy element, to see the meter going backwards. I wish that we'd have had that picture for our marketing materials. The place would have been filled.
We found sexy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that was sexy to me. Again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, panel. Again, and I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Tampa Bay Times, Nature's Food Patch, Covanta Energy, and Clearwater Gas. They've all really helped us a lot, and panel, you've given us a lot of food for thought. We will wind up this series in June. We had earlier announced it for May, but a conflict has come up, and we don't have the exact date yet. We'll be putting that on our website at spcollege.edu/solutions. So just watch for that, and we'll let you know if you're on our mailing list. Good night, and thank you for coming again.